So we were handed nuclear weapons out of a world war. We've been playing ethical catch-up ever since. The next thing is going to be when robots are programmed to make the decision as to whether life is to be taken. Machines don't have emotion. There's no getting away from them. I don't think they can be uninvented any more than nuclear weapons can be uninvented. I think we have to get our retribution in first this time. Humans aren't quick enough to defeat machines. We need machines to defeat machines. I'm Chris Lincoln-Jones. I'm here at the National Army Museum doing an interview for the British Army Review. I'm the author, or shortly to be the author, of Dr. Moore's Automaton, which is published on January the 28th. I'm a veteran, 40 years service, 25 in the regulars and 15 in the reserves. And during that reserve time I worked in the defence industry on drones. I've done quite a bit on the law of armed conflict and ethics, and that's where my book comes from, is what could you do now with today's technology to make a robotic weapon. I walked through the gates of Woolwich in South East 18 to be a potential officer in the Royal Artillery. And a year later, I was at Sandhurst and into the Gunners as an anti-tank troop commander, and then went on and followed the boys' own adventure route of military service, going into the Commando Gunners from there, and then commanded the Special OP battery, 473 battery, in the as the Berlin Wall was falling, and for the Op Granby, the first Gulf War, and then on to do a staff job in intelligence. So that was pretty good. An intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition and reconnaissance background, which led out of the army and into the defence industry working on drones. So that's just encapsulated 40 years of service. Not entirely 40 years, 25 regular, and then twice the citizen as a reservist for another 15, during which time I was in the defence industry. All drones really, and again still the surveillance world. Father actually was in the Fleet Air Arm, so it was a little bit sniffy when I decided to go green rather than dark blue. But I got a bit fed up with the thought of being an academic. I was a good scientist, and had got a place at university to do microbiology and genetics, and I found myself thinking, is that what I really want? I was a countryman. You know, I lived in the country and do to this day, and I thought I'll give this a try. So I think I was a bit of a Marmite soldier, hence leaving as a major. I was described once, LJ speaks truth to princes, and in that era that didn't always go down well. But I did well, and certainly my modest achievements were really because I did the funnies. I spent a long time on board HM ships, jumping out of aeroplanes, sneaking out of submarines, doing that sort of thing, and not being adjutant and all the other smart things. And that suited me. I'm very glad, and it was quite good. It allowed me the opportunity to leave with quite a lot of my life ahead of me, to go in and then start doing more interesting things as I have in the last 5-10 years. Particular highlight I think would have to be leading 473 battery on Op Granby. That was the most extraordinary thing, an armoured war, serving under my old commanding officer Ian Jury in his brigade, and being the coordinator of the artillery and air component and commanding my battery for the 16th 5th Lancers in the divisional reconnaissance screen was, yeah, a lot. It might only have been 100 hours, it seemed longer. I'm not very fashionable. I did quite like the fighty bits of what I was doing. It was very nice to go around the world on the Queen's as then expense. But when you practice for your profession intensely, as the units that I had been in and commanded did, when the opportunity arises for you to put it into real practice, that's a rare thing, and was a rare thing then. 3 tours in Northern Ireland don't really prepare you to go out into the desert in a completely alien environment and fight an armoured war. Actually, I probably did more operational tours as a reservist than I did in the regulars. Ireland, the Gulf, but then I did Afghanistan as a reservist, and I went and did a headquarters job in Naples for the campaign against Gaddafi in Libya. So yeah, I've had a lot of experience. We went from a 2-dimensional view of warfare in the Green Army to realising that it was a lot more complex than that. And actually I recall it was very much off the back of a cigarette packet, coordination of the artillery, the rockets and the aircraft in Iraq. But I realised a few times after hearing the rockets, the multiple launch rocket system, rocket pods popping up above me, that I'd just put 640 bomblets per rocket into the air, and I had A-10 fighter ground attack aircraft in the vicinity, and that was I suppose the earliest I thought, there's a lot of things whizzing around here, and I better make sure that the two don't intersect. And so I started then guiding aircraft in where the trajectory of the rockets wasn't. And that in effect evolved much later into battle space management, where nearly everything was formally taken into account. And just as I was starting to do it on Op Herrick 9, that was when we started to get information technology to help us to do it, because it was getting increasingly complicated. Drones, rockets, shells, and even the larger caliber direct fire weapons had to be taken into account then. I was a staff officer at Larkhill, the headquarters of the Royal Artillery there, and I was the drone desk officer in the time when we were coming to the end of our first drone, Phoenix, and starting to look around for another one. I'd been in a unit that had the Midge drone, which was a proper drone, something you fired and it took pictures, came back and popped wet film out for you. And then Phoenix, and Phoenix made all the mistakes and had all the troubles working that you really want to have if you want to do drones well. And I think what the gunners learned from Phoenix made Watchkeeper into the system that we needed. Slightly over-exceeded, because the trouble with letting the military decide what the army wants is, people want laser death ray rafts and they keep adding things to it. Whereas I think defence, I've always thought that by and large defence companies, although the bottom line is their share price, are, are as much a force for good as the army, and the military in general is a force for good. And I came away when I stopped working thinking if only people on the two sides would trust each other more, we'd probably get better value for money out of it. The military, to its credit, were pretty much at the sharp end, and the Bristol-based procurement authority was really very good. And the relationship between Thales and Bristol was actually excellent. The same for Lockheed Martin, who are our competitors. It was good. I'll be honest with you, the trouble is too much investment is placed in the technology and the toys, and not enough in the training and the logistics. And gradually it went down the route of the logistics and training was trimmed to pay for the technological part of it, and making an Israeli drone into a aircraft that was compatible with our engineering and health and safety and the standards we set for airspace control, added all kinds of expense and complexity to actually the Watchkeeper 450, which we took out to Iraq and Afghanistan, and which I, as a civilian contractor, deployed into those two theatres. The Watchkeeper 450 was probably good enough for that warfare, but probably not good enough for a near-peer enemy. For example, if we were taking a drone to fight in Eastern Europe, you would certainly not want the Watchkeeper 450 because it's just not secure enough, and the data links and all that technology is not good enough for a highly sophisticated enemy. I drifted into academia, and part of that was to be one of the subject matter experts consulted by the Birmingham University Conflict Resolution Group, the very, very brilliant Professor Nick Wheeler. And I became a bit of a scratched record, because I would say if you are a Yemeni tribesman and a 500-pound bomb just came through the side of your house, you don't really mind whether it was dropped by an F-15 or a Predator. You mind that it came through the side of your house, full stop. The good thing about a drone is that you can do targeting by committee. And targeting is my big thing, and law of armed conflict, and that whole ethics of it has become latterly, and with this book, and the reason for writing the book, has become my raison d'etre. The question you have to ask when you're talking about using a drone to do kinetic attack is, does the fact you have not risked a citizen over a country make your politicians more militarily adventurous? There's nothing like having to write the letters to families at home to explain why their son or daughter was killed on operations, to perhaps restrain military adventurism. And so that tended to be the way I looked at that. I think drones are an excellent way of doing targeting, because you have time and you're not a pilot sitting alone in a cockpit wondering whether he's going to have a missile chasing his tail. The dislocation of expectation of going from where you have been maybe raining harm down on people and then going home to your family can cause a psychological effect. I don't like to exaggerate it. I don't think it's that much of a problem to a well-adjusted serviceman or servicewoman. But I think that's a problem. But distance in the modern world means nothing in terms of technology and what you're doing. It's as easy either way, I think. But that, I think being in theatre has a mental effect that's missing if you're doing it basically from 200 metres from your sitting room. My time down at Crawley, I would go to various, have various speaking parts in France, in this country, and I would see dozens and dozens of what could only be called engineers' toys. But always you were looking and thinking, strides are being made here. This is going to become cheaper. There was a great deal of thought, excellent, drones, that's going to make warfare cheaper. We don't need expensive fighter aircrafts. Probably not so expensive now, but at the time, actually a drone program wasn't much cheaper than a fighter ground attack aircraft program. Because of all the extra technology, the data link, the bandwidth. Reaper, Predator, is fearsomely expensive because the bandwidth on a satellite to take live video down, up and then down is ferocious, and that costs. But the technology, the miniaturization, all that was, the evidence was there, and so it was easy to extrapolate what was going to happen. And then particularly in weaponized drones. Even I was looking during my time doing it at lightweight missiles on beams on drones. It was obvious it was going to happen. And what's easier than strapping a hand grenade to a quadcopter that you can buy off the shelf? It's not quite that easy, but you see what I mean. Drones are easy to shoot down. There's a memorable cartoon with a Russian ZSU-23-4 quadruple-barreled anti-aircraft gun and a drone on a ramp, and the Russian is shouting, "Pull!" Because they can't see very much. Even Predator, which does, probably not now, but did at the time, land with a pilot landing it. It's what we were calling at the time sense and avoid, is not very good. And because they're largely gliders, they fly slow in order to get very, very good endurance. So if you can detect them, they're easy to shoot down. That's why autonomy is going to be a sea change in the way things work, and that's why the modern sensors are so much better, because it'll give better spatial awareness to an uncrewed aircraft. Size matters, and therefore if you want to put a viable yield weapon on board a drone, you need to have the power to lift it for long enough as well. And remember, most quadcopters and certainly drones from a toy shop only have 20 minutes or so in the air and can just about carry the lens of a camera. So yeah, size matters both in terms of surveillance and weapons. Surveillance is all about glass. You can't see a very long way unless you put a decent amount of glass into the camera that you're looking through. The drones that are over Ukraine aren't causing that many casualties. They're an ever-present threat. I've seen some footage where the most obvious thing about a drone, particularly cheap drones, is that you can hear them. They sound like a frantic lawnmower mostly, and it's that audible warning you get that causes you to take cover. And as long as you can stop the temperature of your body being seen with decent overhead cover, you can remain invisible. There's been footage where you've seen that, I won't say panic, but that frisson that's caused when you do hear them, and they're taking cover and getting down and hoping it's not seen you. But that's not very much different from wondering whether you've been seen by a ground observer and the next thing you'll know is knocking on the pearly gates because you don't hear the one that gets you, and artillery. So, yeah, having been shelled a couple of times, that's clears your sinuses a bit. I have a very, very good friend who was a commander gunner like me, and he now looks after film crews all over the world in hostile places. And he made friends with Guy Hibbert, a BAFTA award-winning screenwriter, who rang him up and said, I'm writing a script about drones. Can you give me some advice? And so he said, no, but I know a man who does. And I got this call from Guy, and he sent me the script, which I looked at and thought, I wonder what this is going to be, another civilian telling us about screenplay. And so I sat down and read it and raised a finger with a pencil and then thought, wow, this is good. And I'd instructed the Army Junior Division at Camberley, and I did a complete red ink correction on it. So I photocopied it onto a huge piece of paper and just wrote and wrote and wrote, altered the vocab for him, added the realism, sent it back, and I got £500 for that, actually, which I thought at the time was extremely generous. And I got a very polite little message back saying that's the best 500 quid I've ever spent. And it got shelved. The BBC were going to do a longer piece about it, but they decided they couldn't afford it. And then Guy was at a barbecue with a man called Jed Doherty, who is Colin Firth's partner in Rain Dog Films. And he said, I've got this script. And they went from there. And I got another call saying, could a woman be this colonel in the script? Do you remember the script? I said, yes, of course. Where are you? I said, well, I'm in town at the moment. Come and have breakfast with us. And I met the director, Gavin Hood, and I sketched. I did that thing that military officers are famous for. I just pulled out my cuff and gave a quick briefing straight off that. And they said, okay, fancy being the military advisor? I said, I'll have to think about it. Paused for 2 seconds and said, it's a great idea. 2 weeks later, I was sitting having lunch with Helen Mirren and thinking, how on earth did this happen? So there you are. That's the story of Eye in the Sky. At the party after Eye in the Sky, and because I'd been with the Birmingham group, and they had that chapter 5 of their report talks all about the rise of autonomy, if you like, lethal autonomous weapon systems, as the technologists would call them, and that at the party when I was asked by the writer and the director, so what's the next thing then? And when I said laws and explained what they were, and I said, oh, I'll direct that, well, I'll write that. And I started to think about that. And I also got involved, I'm story consultant to a couple of television series, one of which is I'm working on at the moment with the screenwriter, the same one that wrote Eye in the Sky, about autonomous weapons, drones, both ground and air, a TV series that we're hoping to pitch. And so the talk about it has been going on for quite a while. But it was really when I went to the battlespace management job, followed by the Libya integrating the Navy into the kinetic war over there, the protection of civilians. and learning far more about the targeting process. I'd done strategic targeting at in the Ministry of Defence during my job there, and then I was asked to come and give the practitioner's view of warfare to a course, a Master of Science course on international governance in Wales. And that evolved into doing quite a lot on the law of armed conflict and targeting. And I started to think there's something to write about here. This is the next big thing. Autonomy is going to be the next big thing. And I wish I could remember where it is in Oppenheimer, the film. There's a very good thing in the aftermath when Oppie is being pursued, rather like my hero. After the event, he describes the ethical problem of nuclear weapons. Well, we were handed nuclear weapons out of a world war. We've been playing ethical catch-up ever since. The next thing is going to be when robots are programmed to make the decision as to whether life is to be taken. So we probably ought to get a framework of international law, perhaps, but certainly how ethical governments are going to approach it. There's no getting away from them. I don't think they can be uninvented any more than nuclear weapons can be uninvented. I think we have to get our retribution in first this time, though. And in fact, the launch of my book will be a panel discussion raising those points. I'm a beneficiary of autonomy. Out running in Basra, the rocket attack was detected and then shot down by the system there, and that was you intervened to stop it firing. You didn't make it fire, because what we are going to more and more find is that humans aren't quick enough to defeat machines, so we need machines to defeat machines. I think logistic systems can be automated quickly and without too much problem. But I do think, yes, we are going to need to do this, because there are non-state and state actors around the world who are going to, as I say in my book, being on the moral high ground is all very well, but it doesn't half make you an easy target. The human in the loop will have to set the conditions and the rules. The machines don't have emotions, and they don't have existential threats unless we give them those existential threats. For example, and one of the things I used to say in Wales at university was a machine wouldn't stand over a wounded, defenceless soldier and shoot them just because it could. It wouldn't shoot them because it wanted revenge, or the next door machine had been killed and it was angry, or it was bad. Machines aren't bad, it's people that are bad. Machines are just machines, even cognitive ones. It'll be a very, very, very long time before emotional artificial intelligence arises. My hero in the book hates the expression artificial intelligence, because artificial general intelligence is a long way off. But cognitive machine learning is here. We can, cars can drive, but don't forget the Tesla car is having problems, and one of those problems is if you deface a stop sign, it won't stop because it doesn't look like a stop sign anymore. So making machines clever enough to discern and discriminate, that's tricky. And so I think the rise of the killer robot is all bound up in how we discriminate, act with humanity, proportionally, and only when it's necessary. Now, soldiers always had a tendency to need to think in ones and zeros almost. The old yellow card that I had in Northern Ireland that gave me a series of times when I might use lethal force had to be very, very simple, because in the emotional intensity of conflict, you've got to make quick decisions and you need very, very simple rules. Well, machines like simplicity as much as soldiers do. We've got to be careful not to play catch-up. I still think there's time, and if the rules are all there, the 4 pillars of when you can use lethal force, the 5 pillars of targeting, and then the way that rules of engagement are laid out. A matrix with a set of conditions. Can I do something? Can I not? They're there, and I think they're eminently programmable into a machine. I would like to think we will have a supervisory role, an interventionist role of a human at the stages when it's important. If you can remain in communication with your machine, then you can intervene, whether you should or not. But I think autonomy, in a way, is a little bit like creating survivability in a drone now. When the machine loses human contact, it seeks to regain it. And you program that into a modern drone by just making it fly higher so that the communication link is re-established. There's probably some work to do around that, creating the links, getting the rules right. But I think you're going to have to design something that when it's faced with a robotic threat, it applies robotic rules and speeds. The OODA loop, a machine is always going to win, because the time between decisions is always going to be faster. How do you control a very powerful, technologically sophisticated country that doesn't play by those rules? Tricky. I think that if I add a little bit of realism to it, I think probably the only weapon is economics. We have a House of Lords Committee on Artificial Intelligence, which no doubt looks into this, and Professor Noel Sharkey of the Campaign for Killer Robots comes out all the time about telling people we need to look at this. And I'm friends with Taniel Youssef from Cambridge University, who's also in that sort of ethics space as well. The clamour for rules and for this to be taken seriously and not just allowed to happen because the defence industry have shareholders they want to impress. I spoke at a aerospace conference a long time ago in Paris, and in the green room waiting was an official from the Civil Aviation Authority, and we talked about drones and a bit about autonomy, and he said, look, this is my world, but I think that in future, and many of my colleagues think in future, aircraft will be flown by a man and a dog, and the job of the dog will be to bite the man if he touches the controls. He said, and the reason you have to have a man in the cockpit is passengers won't go up the ramp into an aircraft if they think there's only a computer at the helm. How long will it be before soldiers will rely on a machine? For example, if you're in the back of an armoured personnel carrier and the gun and the driving is all being managed by a machine, how comfortable or uncomfortable are those soldiers in the back who are about to get out going to feel? So I think that's one of the strands that the military ought to be interested in, but they did ought to be in the ethical world as well. If you laying your head down to sleep in a patrol base and the only thing watching the space around you is a machine, you need to be very, very confident before you close your eyes and go to sleep that that machine truly can protect you. The sort of, hey Alexa, is there a terrorist outside the house? Yes. I would say that distrust is probably misplaced. I think very, very good. But then I've come from a world where I know how sensors work, how reliable solid state radars of various kinds are, LiDAR, infrared imaging. You know, if you can afford the sensors, then they'll do a much better job than a human will. But you've just got to get the knowledge across and get people to trust it. You only do that by making them and demonstrating it. I think it's General Sir Richard Barron said that Western soldiers are starting to become very, very expensive. One of the comments I make in the book is that soldiers have a right to life now. The first thing I was told going through Woolwich and sitting down is there's an infinite liability clause to your contract and you could be asked to pay it at any time. That doesn't stick quite so hard now. We no longer have 8-man rooms for soldiers to live in. They have accommodation with ensuite, this and that, paternity leave, maternity leave, pensions, leave. Machine doesn't need any of that, so the recurring costs can be cut enormously. And I think my idea of taking the driver out of an armoured vehicle is very good. I don't think that there should be any crew in an artillery weapon. I think conventional guns are a thing of the past. I think gunners could be logisticians and maintainers hiding, waiting for the autonomous platform to come back to be fed, to go out and to a place where it surveys itself in, responds to data coming in, and if you lose one, that's okay. No, fuel another one up, send it out. If you took a gun, for example, taking the crew away from it does save costs because you don't need as much metal or technology in there and you don't need the comforts. What you will need is a way of making it respond to a command to put an angle and a bearing and an elevation and load a shell. So that ought to be cheaper. I say ought to be because my experience is that things are rarely as cheap as you hope they're going to be. Do you think that two governments will come together and say, right, we're going to war with each other now, and when my robots beat your robots, we'll surrender our economy to you? I think warfare needs bloodshed in order for people to come back to the table.